I partied hard and flirted with everyone, but when I returned, I got the shock of my life.
Sometimes life takes you into roads you never thought you would go. That's what happened to me. I took the wrong way and lost everything. Hey Reddit guys, I am Lily, a 31-year-old woman. When I was 27, I married James, who is the same age as me. So I started the story like this because it's all about James, how I cheated on him and how I lost him. Yes, how I'm also going through the consequences of his revenge. It's going to be an interesting story for you all. As for me, it is still a nightmare and a lesson at the same time. I'm also going to beg you since the beginning. Please don't be harsh on me. I know I have made some unforgivable mistakes, but it is what it is. I can't do anything. When I was 25, I met James, a young and handsome man who had caught my attention since day one. I knew he was going to someone important in my life. I felt it. I saw him at a party, to be honest. We flirted, exchanged phone numbers, and got in touch. The rest, you know it now. So guys, long story short, we knew each other, got in a relationship for 2 years, and then got married. We loved each other very much, and we really cared about each other. Also, we had a big passion, and sex with him was never boring. Well, I will talk about sex a lot here because I think it's a very important part of a relationship. I am sorry about it. We got married and everything was great. I felt complete. We both had our careers, earned well, were independent, and life was great. He was a very serious person, and I was the funny one. We completed each other. I'm a wedding planner and he is an IT engineer. I loved my job. I loved making and watching people happy. It was like my dream job. Me and James used to have a lot of fun. We used to participate in parties, go out on dates together, and go on road trips. Our relationship never got boring. We also used to try new things regarding sexual relationships, like new positions and new locations. Once we did it on the trunk of our car in a forest. We did it twice and we could not get enough. The adrenaline was the pleasure we were feeling. It really was amazing. I loved him and the way he made me feel. So this is just an example of how fun our life was. I wish I didn't cheat on him and lose him. Everything started when I met his cousin, Tom. Tom used to live in the United Kingdom, so he didn't participate in our wedding. The first time I met him was when he came back and his parents organized a welcome party for him. And we were invited, of course. Tom was a very handsome guy, and he was a year younger than me. He was tall, blonde, and had blue eyes. Those eyes blew my mind and destroyed everything I had built until that moment. The party was a surprise one, and it was a very good party because it was planned by me. It's actually true. His parents asked me to plan it for them. When he came, James introduced me to him, and he exactly said, "Oh, Lily, Lily, you look so sweet and gorgeous. How did my cousin conquer a girl like you?" And he winked at me. Was he joking? Was he flirting? I didn't understand, but I tend to get shy when I like someone, so I blushed right away and told him, he has his methods, Tom." Then he replied, "You haven't seen mine yet." I didn't understand what was going on, but I liked him. Before getting back home, he told me, "We are going to be very good friends, Lily. Can feel it." And again, he winked. I just smiled and winked back to him. While we were going back home, I asked my husband a little about Tom. He told me that Tom is a womanizer, and he also told me to be careful with him and not get too close because he doesn't take into consideration that I was his wife. I got offended at that moment and asked him, "Don't you trust me, baby?" "I trust you, but I don't trust my cousin. He is a manipulator who can manipulate everyone's mind." "Well, I don't care how he is. As long as I am yours, I would never be with someone else." "Then he is your cousin. Come on now." I've never seen James getting jealous. He told me that he saw how Tom talked to me and how he winked at me different times, and that was not a good sign. Finally, James told me that he didn't want to see me anywhere near Tom. Was that a threat? Because you know I don't like threats. He told me that it was not a threat and he was just trying to protect me from him. But the truth is, I didn't need anyone's protection. I was 31 years old, and I was able to protect myself and make my own decisions. I got mad at him actually about those words beating. He had never been the jealous type. And for his cousin? Really? I would never get jealous about my cousins, my best friends, or anyone else, as a matter of fact, because I knew my husband and I trusted him. This trust game would kill both of us in the future. And his warnings were so right. I was the one who was being doubtful about what he was saying related to his cousin Tom. The first time that I saw Tom, it already felt like he was flirting with me. I didn't want to believe it because he was my husband's cousin. James and Tom grew up together, so I could not believe he was flirting with me. My husband also didn't want to see me anywhere near him. You know what the strange thing is? That I liked him. I even liked him flirting with me. I would never say that to my husband because I thought it just felt like it could be liked by someone. I mean, I was still attractive. My husband lately didn't say even a nice word to me, never a compliment, and I needed it. I needed or wanted him sometimes to tell me that I was beautiful or that I looked sexy and those kinds of things. I always tried to look good and attractive, but I never heard a nice word from him. He would say something only when I asked him how I looked. Well, we, women, want to feel loved, liked, and appreciated, and I wasn't feeling any of this. Until now, I had only told you about the first time I met Tom. The second time I saw him was the next day. He came by and asked about James. I told him he was still working. You can call him and meet him later when he comes back home. But then he said, "Since I am here, why not take a coffee with you? Won't you invite me in?" he said. I invited him in. He came in and he had this look into my eyes. I felt like he was flirting with me only with his eyes. I felt so uncomfortable and I didn't know how to start a conversation, but he was that kind of guy that would never stop talking, so he didn't leave the situation in my hands. So tell me a little, how did you and James meet? I told him it was a kind of cliche story because we met at a party and then we started chatting and talking. And then the story went on. And here we are, married and planning to build a family together. Then I asked him, "How about you? Do you have anyone in your life?" "No, I don't. When I first saw you, I wished you were single. I didn't know you were my cousin's wife," he said. "That's clearly a lie because I guess you have seen our pictures on social media, like Facebook and Instagram," I told him. He smiled and told me he was joking. He was clearly flirting with me, and again, I liked it. I had those kinds of feelings about talking to him, and I was afraid to stay alone with him. I mean, afraid of myself. I had to come to my senses. He was my husband's cousin, and hey, I was married. I wasn't allowed to have feelings for someone else. No. We had a coffee, and while he was in, my husband came back home from work. He said hi to him and gave me a kiss. I could see he was angry because he had told me that he didn't want to see me anywhere near his cousin Tom. But I was not one that you could give orders to. I was not a girl that would live the life as others wanted me to. So I didn't care if he was angry at that moment. I wanted him to understand why he didn't want me to be near him. The truth is that I understood my husband, because Tom really was a womanizer. He was flirting with me in our house, and he didn't care that I was his cousin's wife. But Tom didn't stop flirting with me even when his cousin and my husband came home. He kept staring at me in a strange way, and he also said he needed me to plan an event for him. I told him that I planned weddings and asked him if he was going to be married, and then he answered, "I can't get married because you are already married." Then I smiled and turned to my husband. "Don't worry and don't feel jealous, I'm only joking." My husband was going out of his mind, I could notice it, but he just laughed. I blushed, but I will not lie. I was feeling liked, and I liked it. I also liked Tom. Finally, a man who still knows how to flirt and make a woman feel good and attractive. He really wanted me to plan an event for him. It was going to be his birthday soon. He was going to be 30 years old, and he was planning to have a big party on that occasion, and he wanted me to plan and organize everything. I was in a position I would never want to be in because my husband was staring at me like he wanted to tell me not to do that. But at that moment, I didn't think to tell him I was busy and I could not organize his birthday party. I just asked him, "Are you serious? Can't you do a birthday party by yourself?" He told me that he wanted it to be perfect, and besides that, he didn't have time for that. So I said yes. I could see how angry my husband was, but Tom seemed very happy. After that, he left, and me and my husband started fighting over me deciding to help him with his birthday party. My husband told me that he only wanted to be near him because planning a birthday party for him was not a big deal. I asked my husband not to be jealous because I would only organize his party. I was not going to sleep with him, and I would never cheat on him, neither with his cousin nor with someone else. But I was going to do that. Tom was planning to have a good big party for his birthday, so I was going to meet him various times and be alone with him. My husband seemed to make peace with that fact, and he also seemed to trust me when I told him that everything would be all right and I would not cheat on him. Never. But it was not like that, because during that time he was being very observant, and I would find that out later. Sometimes he asked me if he could come with me when I used to meet Tom regarding his birthday, and I would say yes, even if I didn't want him to come. Tom was always flirting with me since day one. Later on, he started to avoid that in the presence of my husband, but James knew him very well. Also, at that point, Tom had my phone number, and we would also message each other every day. He made me laugh a lot. He was so different from his cousin and my husband, James. James was very serious. He almost never told a joke. Instead, Tom would always crack a joke and make me laugh even when I was sad about something. He always told me that if I wasn't his cousin's wife, I would be his wife. He said it as a joke, but I like it. But lately, he has been more serious and hitting on me without joking. He would provoke me and come near me, smelling my hair or touching it, touching my belly gently. I'm so ashamed to accept it, but when he touched me, I would tremble. Something beautiful was happening between us. It wasn't actually that beautiful because I was married to his cousin, but I liked it anyway. One day while we were taking a look at the place where I was going to organize the event, he came on my back, smelled my hair, and kissed my neck. I trembled. I was shaking. I wanted to turn and kiss his lips and feel his body touching mine, but instead I turned and acted angry. "What are you doing, Tom? I'm your cousin's wife." He didn't speak but started kissing my lips passionately, and then I couldn't stop. We kissed and had sex. He kissed every inch of my body and then grabbed me into his arms, put me over a table, and took my clothes off in an impatient way. I also took his clothes off, and I was impatient to feel him inside of me. It was amazing. I had been imagining this scene for some weeks, and finally it happened. That kind of sex was wild, and with my husband, it had been a long time since we tried it. After that, I felt full, like I could go against the whole world and win. We got dressed very fast because we didn't want anyone to come and find us there. Maybe James because he knew where I was. Tom told me he felt amazing the same way as me. He also told me that he liked me a lot. He said he didn't want to do that to his cousin, but he was beginning to like me a lot. He never talked about feelings. Me? I was beginning to have feelings for him, but I knew that was a mistake. That day I went home and I was feeling so ashamed to look my husband in the eyes. He just asked me how everything was going, and I told him fine. We had everything planned, and Tom's birthday was going to be in 4 days. Those 4 days I tried not to talk to him or answer his messages. A night before his birthday, he texted me again. "What are you wearing tomorrow? Please wear a dress where I can easily reach you and give you an orgasm." Oh my God, was he normal? He wasn't, but neither was I. Because when I read that message, I got really horny and started thinking about the next day. I told him I was going to wear a black sexy dress that would blow his mind away and then turn my phone off because I could not handle reading other messages from him. The next day it was his birthday, and the party was in the evening. I went there before to check if everything was right, and I also found him there. It was just the two of us and the staff. He grabbed my hand and led me to the women's bathroom. For the first time, I had sex in there. Me and my husband used to have a lot of sex adventures, but we never did it in the bathroom. But guess who had come there before the other guests too? My husband. He had come near the bathrooms and heard us screaming, he told me I saw later. He knew everything, but he acted like he didn't. But now I know how he felt because I am feeling the same way. That day he acted like nothing, but I could see his madness in his eyes because Tom started doing what he did best, flirting. I flirted back with him, thinking my husband would not get jealous anymore about him. He told me in front of my husband that I looked sexy in that dress, and he would stare at me in a way like he wanted to undress me in front of everyone. James came near me, and he told me that my dress was over-exaggerated. I thought I was sexy and beautiful, I told him. James was very jealous, and I could see it in his eyes. He didn't talk anymore. Instead, he started flirting with my best friend and my colleague at the same time. He was doing that to make me mad as well or make me feel the same way he was feeling. It really changed my mood, and I started getting very jealous of him. Later during the party, I didn't see my best friend anymore. She had gone without even saying bye. She was there because of me and because she helped me with the party. After a few minutes, my husband told me he had to go home because he was not feeling well. He told me that I could stay, and at that moment I trusted him. He went home and I stayed. After 2 hours, I said bye to everyone, especially Tom. I told him that the sex in the bathroom and the party organization were my gifts for him. I kissed his lips one more when he accompanied me to the car, and I went home feeling happy. The shock would come when I would reach home. In our bed, in that same bed we made love 1,000 times, I found my husband and my best friend doing it. I could hear their moaning from the living room. My world fell apart. I didn't know who was there with my husband, but I could not stand there and not look. So I went there and found them doing it. They didn't stop until I started screaming. My husband then told me, "What did you finish with Tom? I heard you moaning in the bathroom, but I didn't interrupt your fun, so why are you interrupting us now? Why the hell on my bed and with my best friend?" He told me that I deserved it. My best friend felt so ashamed and just said sorry. I could see that she didn't know what to say. They both cheated on me. So I dressed sexy and flirted at a party, and he made sure I'd regret it forever. He took his revenge the hard way. I cheated on him with his cousin, and he did the same to me with my best friend. So I lost my husband and my best friend as well. But that scene made me come to my senses. I had done the same thing to him. He was right to do that to me. But how could my best friend betray me? We had grown up together. I had helped her in everything. I found her a job at the company where I was working, and this is how he rewarded me in this way? My heart was broken in 1,000 pieces. My world fell apart. I was the one who did this. I thought my husband would not find out. He was not stupid. Of course he would understand everything, and he made me regret everything. His revenge destroyed me, but I knew I had destroyed him as well. Our marriage and the life we had built were falling apart all because of me. Yep. My husband told me that he never wanted to see me again. He said I had an hour to take all my things and get out of his house. Then he took my best friend, and they both went out in the middle of the night. It was almost morning, actually. I had never felt more humiliated in my life. I started crying. I hated crying, but I started packing my clothes. I called a taxi and went to my sister's apartment. Humiliated, broken, and destroyed it all, I didn't know what to say. What would I tell my family that I cheated first and my husband took revenge on me? No matter how bad it looked, I had to be honest. I could not lie anymore. I had lied enough, and I had done enough damage. But that scene, guys, of them doing it in our bed, I will never forget. It was traumatic, and the hardest thing I have had to go through in my entire life. This is my story, guys. The story of how I turned into a cheater and how I was humiliated and cheated on because of my decisions and actions. Please be gentle and kind. I'm already going through a lot. I hope you all have a great life. Thank you for reading my story. I'm Lillian. Update. Hello, guys. I'm back to give you an update because I have seen that you have still many questions about my story. Most of them are related to Tom. You have asked if I continued the relationship with him, and also have I heard from my husband. About Tom, I have seen and talked to him, but I didn't want to continue with him. To be honest, he was not okay with it. We both decided that what we did was a mistake because he cheated and betrayed his cousin as well. My husband didn't deserve that. So no matter how charming and attractive Tom was, I could not have a relationship with him. So we just talked and decided that it was better for us to go our separate way. My husband blocked me everywhere. I knew he would do that. But actually, after watching him have sex with my best friend, I don't want to see him anymore. It was over, guys. I hurt him, and he hurt and humiliated me. He cheated and made me see. So this is life. Falling into its traps is easy. Don't do that, guys. Keep the person you love close, and don't let anyone destroy what you have, because you see now what I'm going through. I am living a nightmare. Every night I see them in my dreams, doing it in my bed and weakening up just to realize that it all happened to me. Who would have guessed? It's really a nightmare. I can't work properly. I'm not eating or I'm not even sleeping anymore, but I have to go on. I'm not acting innocent because I know it was my fault from the beginning, but I guess I am paying the consequences. I'm paying for what I did. This is it, guys. My story ends here. Please advise me on how I can start living again and how I can forgive myself and go on with my life. Much love, Lily.
If someone told me a year ago I'd be here on Reddit, airing out my darkest mistaken for strangers to see, I'd have thought they were crazy. But here I am, sharing the kind of story I'd usually only read about, except this time it's mine. It's been a mess more than I could ever imagine, and honestly, I still can't believe how it all unraveled. My life flipped upside down, and all because of one thing I didn't see coming, a new alarm system. And when the person I shouldn't have been seeing tried to sneak in, yeah, things got bad fast. Hi Reddit, I'm using a throwaway account because, I really messed up this time. I'm not even sure where to start, but here goes. I'm 33, and my husband is the same age. We've been married 5 years now, and honestly, it's always been solid. Like, really solid. He's the kind of person who's grounded, dependable, and thoughtful. I never had to doubt him, and, to be fair, I still don't. If I'm honest, he's been the rock in our relationship, always steady and working hard to give us a good life. But lately, I don't know. Things just started feeling predictable. We've got this routine we do every day. Work, dinner, TV, sleep, repeat. I mean, he's great, and I know he'd do anything to make me happy. But it's like we've lost that spark, you know? Somewhere along the way, the excitement just faded. And it's weird because I never thought that would bother me as much as it does now. Here I am being grateful for all he has done for us. Yet here I feel a bit stagnant. It may sound cliche, but just like I have this amazing husband and a good job and a great home and the world and everything, but there is this part of me that craves that, this part of me that feels like life was so much more interesting before. It sounds like I am being ungrateful, which may well be true, but that is the way it is. It's as if I wanted to have something to refresh the routine, something dangerous to haste my feelings, and that is where it started going wrong because that little itch for some thrill became a full-blown disease. Alright, so here's where things get messy. I never thought I'd be the person to let things go this far, but then again, life has a way of surprising you, and not always in the best way. Enter Luke, someone from work who's just different. He's got this confidence about him, this laid-back, daring kind of vibe that's the total opposite of my husband. Don't get me wrong, my husband's amazing, but Luke's got this edge that's hard to ignore. He's the kind of guy who walks into a room and just owns it without even trying. And maybe that's what drew me in, that unpredictability, that spark I'd been missing. It started out innocent enough. We'd work on projects together, joke around, just casual stuff. And yeah, I knew there was a line, but at first it didn't feel like I was crossing it. We'd text now and then, sharing funny memes or just chatting about random things. It felt harmless, like no big deal, right? But of course, little by little, the tone started to shift. We'd start texting more often, and those harmless conversations turned into something else a little more personal, a little more flirty. I remember the first time I felt that guilt, like a pit in my stomach, thinking, what am I doing? But then I'd just brush it off, telling myself it was all just harmless banter, nothing serious. Except that didn't last long. Soon enough, we were planning to meet outside of work, just for coffee. Or at least that's what I told myself. But coffee turned into drinks. And before I knew it, I was in way over my head. I suppose I was rationalizing it or looking for prior justification for doing it. The kind of things I'd tell myself were, oh, it is just to cover the time, no more. My marriage was still strong. I had to remind myself then, perhaps this was something I needed to do to find that feeling of excitement that had been missing from my life. I was hardly home, but when I was a dutiful wife. While with Luke, I felt as if I was not bound by any rules. It was exciting, and I believe this was a major reason that I was interested in continually achieving that high. At the same time, I knew it was wrong. Every time I looked at my husband, that guilt would creep back in, but it never felt like enough to stop. I'd convinced myself that it was just filling a void, that my husband didn't have to know, and what he didn't know wouldn't hurt him. But deep down, I think I knew it was just a matter of time before it all came crashing down. A few weeks back, my husband surprised me with a gift I definitely didn't see coming, a brand new high-tech alarm system for the house. Apparently, there'd been a few break-ins around the neighborhood, and he wanted us to feel safe. So, without telling me, he went ahead and set the whole thing up. He was so proud of it, too, showing me all the features like a kid with a new toy. At first, I played along, acting impressed and grateful, but inside I felt a knot in my stomach. I was nervous and it was hard to shake. I mean, the whole point of an alarm is to keep people out, right? But I had this whole secret going on, and the thought of an extra layer of security made me feel exposed. Still, I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was overthinking things. I figured, how bad could it really be? It's just an alarm, and I'd keep being careful. Except this system was way more advanced than I expected. It covered every door, every window, and even had motion sensors outside. And here's the kicker. He could control it all through an app on his phone. Every time a door opened, a window moved, or someone got close to the house, he'd get a notification sent straight to his screen. He joked about how nothing would get past us now, and all I could do was laugh along, hiding how nervous I was actually feeling. From that day on, I started to feel a constant, low-key anxiety any time I thought about seeing Luke. I mean, it's one thing to sneak around, but now I had to worry about setting off alarms and notifications that would pop up right on my husband's phone. But the more I worried, the more I tried to convince myself it was fine, that I was just overreacting. Besides, it wasn't like I planned on letting Luke come anywhere near the house anyway. I just kept telling myself to keep my cool, act normal, and not let it get to me. But looking back, that was probably the first real sign that I was losing control, that things weren't as under wraps as I thought. As time went on, I began feeling a change in the entire course of the affair. This growing anxiety in my mind was gradually washing away the zest that until now had been keeping me fully hooked. Needless to point out that a new alarm system made me nervous, thereby making me realize that my husband can receive an alert at any time. And of course, there was just him the way he'd come home, check his phone, or casually ask how my day was. Every single thing was making me more nervous, as if he was expecting me to mess up at some point. There were a few close calls too, moments where I felt like I'd barely managed to cover my tracks. One time, Luke had texted me right as my husband walked into the room, and I had to quickly turn off my phone and act like nothing happened. Another time, I was on my way back from meeting Luke when I got home just in time to see my husband pulling into the driveway. I barely had a second to pull myself together and act casual, but I made it just barely. It was moments like those that made my heart race, but not in the way I'd been hoping for. Still, even with all the tension and the guilt building up, I kept telling myself it was harmless, just a bit of excitement on the side. I wasn't planning on leaving my husband. It was just something to shake things up, to break out of the routine. I'd look at him and feel a pang of guilt, but I'd quickly push it aside, convincing myself that no one was really getting hurt. I told myself that everyone needs a little escape now and then, and that's all this was for me, just a little escape. But over time, I started taking extra precautions to keep things hidden. I'd delete our messages right after reading them, and I even checked the alarm app settings a few times when my husband wasn't around, just to see if there was any way he might be tracking my movements. I started setting my phone to Do Not Disturb whenever I was with him, just in case any texts from Luke popped up unexpectedly. I'd turn the brightness down too, making sure no notifications could be seen at a glance. And the more steps I took, the more tense things became. It felt like I was constantly looking over my shoulder, always on edge, wondering if he'd notice a missed call or catch a glimpse of something on my phone. What was once thrilling started feeling more like a high-stakes game where the stakes kept getting higher. The lines were getting blurry between what I'd set out to do and what I was willing to risk. But still, I kept going. The thought of stopping never felt real. In my mind, as long as I kept things quiet, nothing would really come of it. Looking back, I can see that every little thing I did to cover my tracks only made things worse. It built up this tension I could barely handle, and I started realizing that I wasn't as in control as I'd thought. But by then, it was too late to just stop. It all went down on a Friday night, the kind of night where things are quiet, and I thought I had everything under control. My husband had a night shift that evening, and I figured it was the perfect time to see Luke without worrying about anyone finding out. We'd done this a few times before Luke would come over after my husband left, and then he'd leave long before my husband came home. Simple, right? So, like usual, I told Luke to swing by once things were clear. What I didn't count on, though, was the silent alarm feature my husband had set up without mentioning it to me. I thought I'd covered all the bases, disabling the parts of the system that I knew about, but I'd clearly missed something. As soon as Luke got to the back door and stepped inside, I heard a faint chime, which wasn't supposed to happen. My heart immediately started pounding. I tried to play it cool, but there was this voice in the back of my head saying something was seriously off. And of course, it was only a minute later that my phone started buzzing. I saw my husband's name pop up on the screen, and I felt this cold wave of panic hit me. I picked up, trying to keep my voice steady, acting like everything was normal. He didn't waste any time getting to the point. He'd gotten an alert on his phone that the back door had opened, and he was calling to check on things. I stammered out a quick excuse, saying maybe the wind blew the door open or something, but he wasn't buying it. He told me he'd check the camera feed himself through the app. My stomach dropped. I hadn't even thought about the camera settings. I could feel my hands shaking as I tried to think of something, anything to say. I just remember feeling frozen, like every possible excuse slipped away in that moment. Luke was still inside, looking just as panicked as I felt, and all I could think was that it was only a matter of seconds before the truth came crashing down. "Sure enough," he called back, his tone colder this time. He asked again what was going on, and I could hear in his voice that he already knew something wasn't right. He was just waiting for me to admit it. My mind was spinning, searching for a way out, but I knew I was backed into a corner. There was no quick excuse that could explain this one away. Finally, with nowhere else to turn, I tried to play it down, saying I'd invited a friend over, making it sound like it was no big deal. But he pressed harder, asking why this friend was coming over so late, and why I hadn't mentioned anything earlier. The more he asked, the clearer it was that he was already connecting the dots. I couldn't even bring myself to look at Luke, who was standing there, probably just as shocked as I was. The silence between us felt like it lasted forever, and in that moment, I realized there was no turning back. The moment he came home, I could feel the weight of everything hanging in the air. He didn't start with any big questions or accusations right away, just a quiet look, like he was taking it all in, putting pieces together. I tried to act casual, but inside I was bracing for whatever was about to come next. He sat down across from me, and there was this long silence, one that felt almost unbearable. Finally, he took out his phone and began scrolling through the app, and that's when he mentioned something I hadn't expected. He'd gone through other alerts from the past few weeks, notifications he hadn't thought much about at the time, but now felt he needed to revisit. Each time he read one aloud, I felt this growing sense of dread, because I could see where this was headed. He was putting together every little thing I'd brushed off as harmless, but now they all seemed to add up to the truth. I tried to keep calm, pretending I was as surprised as he was, but deep down, I knew I was running out of time. He looked me in the eyes, and with this calm but heavy tone, he asked, "Is there something you want to tell me?" At that point, my excuses were slipping away, and I realized there was no quick way out of this. He deserved something, even if it was a watered-down version of the truth. I took a shaky breath and told him I'd been texting someone from work, someone I'd grown close to. I tried to make it sound as casual as I could, like it was all just silly messages and nothing more, but he didn't look convinced. I could see the hurt in his eyes, and it was clear that my explanation wasn't doing anything to ease the damage. He asked me if it went further, if there was more I hadn't told him, and I just couldn't bring myself to admit it all. So I kept it vague, saying it was mostly texting, that maybe I'd met him once or twice, but nothing serious. He sat there listening quietly, never raising his voice or getting angry. If anything, his reaction was worse than yelling. It was this quiet, steady hurt that felt like it was tearing me apart. After a long silence, he simply said, "I need some time to think." And then just like that, he stood up, went to our bedroom, and started packing a bag. I watched him move around, calm but clearly heartbroken, and I felt this crushing weight of guilt settle over me. I tried to say something, to explain myself, to tell him it didn't mean anything, but he just shook his head, telling me he needed space, that he needed to clear his head and figure out what he wanted to do. He said he couldn't even look at me right now, that he had to get out before he said something he'd regret. The whole time, he was calm, methodical, like he'd already made up his mind. Watching him pack felt surreal, like I was watching my life crumble right in front of me, and there was nothing I could say to stop it. I kept thinking he'd snap, yell, or do something to let out what he was feeling, but he didn't. He zipped up his bag, looked at me one last time with this look of quiet disappointment, and walked out. I think that look hurt more than anything he could have said. When he closed the door behind him, I was left standing there in silence, feeling the weight of everything I'd done finally hit me all at once. The silence after he left was almost unbearable. I stood there in the empty house, feeling this strange mix of disbelief and shame, like it all still hadn't fully sunk in. All the excitement I'd been chasing, all those moments I thought were harmless little escapes, felt so pointless now. There was nothing left to distract me, no thrill, just this empty house and the weight of what I'd done pressing down on me. I kept trying to justify it to myself, replaying everything over and over in my mind, looking for some reason to make it all make sense. I told myself I was just trying to break free from the routine, to find some spark. But every excuse felt hollow now. My husband had been my anchor, the one constant I could always rely on, and I'd thrown that away for something that, looking back, barely even mattered. I spent hours just sitting there feeling lost and alone, thinking about all the ways I could have made different choices. It was like this wave of realization crashing over me everything I'd had with him, the stability, the trust. It was all gone now. And for what? A few moments of excitement that I'd convinced myself were worth the risk? The idea of facing life without him, without that steady presence, terrified me. I didn't know who I was anymore without him. Finally, I couldn't stand it any longer. I reached out to him, calling and texting, practically begging him for another chance, pleading with him to come home so we could talk it through. I told him I'd do anything to make it right, that I'd go to counseling, cut off all contact with Luke, whatever he wanted. I admitted to him that I'd made a huge mistake, that I was sorry, and that I knew I'd hurt him in ways I couldn't even fully understand. But even as I sent those messages, a part of me knew it might not make a difference. I could feel how deeply I'd hurt him, and I knew he might not want to hear it. The idea that I'd lost him, that he'd never forgive me, was this constant gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach. It was only then, sitting in that empty house, that I truly understood what I'd thrown away. And yet, I kept trying, hoping he'd answer, hoping he'd give me just one more chance. But as the hours passed and my messages went unread, the reality of what I'd done began to settle in, and for the first time, I realized I might have to face the consequences of this alone. A few days later, he finally came back, but it was like he was a completely different person. He walked in with this calm, almost distant look, and I could feel the tension settle over us the second he stepped through the door. There were no warm greetings, no immediate attempt to talk things out. He just kept his distance, like he was sizing up the situation and figuring out his next move. We sat down across from each other, and for a long time he didn't say anything. I tried to hold back to let him speak first, but the silence felt like it was pressing down on me. Finally, he looked up and said, "We can't just go back to normal, not after this." His voice was steady, but I could tell there was a lot he was holding back, a lot he probably wanted to say but didn't. He made it clear that things couldn't just go back to the way they were, that trust wasn't something he could just flip a switch on. He said he needed time to even decide if he wanted to try to rebuild anything, and he didn't try to sugarcoat it or make it easy on me. He was straightforward about it, saying he wasn't sure if he could ever really look at me the same way again. Hearing that hurt, but I knew he had every right to feel that way. He laid out a few conditions if we were going to even attempt to move forward. Counseling was non-negotiable, he said, and he needed to see that I was committed to doing the work. He didn't want any promises or reassurances, just actions that showed I was serious. And he was firm on needing his own space emotionally, at least. He was here in the house, but he made it clear that we weren't together right now, not in the way we used to be. He needed time apart, even if we were under the same roof. There was no offer of instant forgiveness, no softening to make me feel better. He wasn't interested in making me feel anything other than the weight of my actions. And in that moment, I realized that if there was ever going to be a way back from this, it was going to be on his terms. I would have to earn back every ounce of his trust, and I could see that it might never be the same, no matter how much I tried to make it right. As he finished laying out his terms, he looked at me one last time with a look that felt colder than any words he could have said. I knew, right then, that he wasn't forgiving me. Not now, maybe not ever. And it was only then, sitting across from him, that I understood just how deep the damage went. Update. So, here I am, back on Reddit, trying to piece together what's left of my life. There's no happy ending to this story, and maybe there never will be. My husband's back, but things aren't the same. He keeps his distance, and it's clear that right now, everything is on his terms. If we're going to stay together, it's going to be because he chooses to let me back in, if he ever can. And honestly, I don't know if that day will come. I've realized that the thrill I was chasing, the excitement that seemed so harmless, has left me with nothing but regret. It's strange how something that feels so small at first can unravel everything good in your life. Looking back, I took his loyalty and stability for granted, and now, every day, I'm reminded of just how undeserving I was of it. He didn't deserve any of this, and I wish I'd seen that before I threw it all away for something so meaningless. So, to anyone reading this, let my story be a warning. Chasing a thrill, looking for a spark outside of something real, can destroy everything you've built. I don't know if I'll ever fully make up for the damage I've done, but I know one thing. If I could take it all back, I would in a heartbeat. For now, all I can do is try to show him I'm serious, that I'm willing to put in the work, even if it's too late. But I know that the chance I threw away might never come back.